Alright. So we're back again. As I mentioned a few videos back, I'm making terrain, and specifically some trench terrain. You know, I know trenches are all the rage right now, so I'm gonna get on that bandwagon. But despite the bandwagon, this is actually something I've been wanting to do for a while. And I first was inspired to do it when I saw Eric Hobby Workshop, and he did like a full-on trench board, like big old thing, whole board. He had two sides, he had a no man's land. It was beautiful. And I figure with my current dive into the Horus Heresy, Trench Crusade obviously just came out, I need some trenches, you know? And, you know, while inspired by Eric, there's one problem with the board that he made, in that it's a whole fucking board. And I, for one, do not have the space for that. And if you do, you know, more power to you. But once again, I do not have that. So my goal with this terrain was to make something that's a little more manageable in terms of scale, obviously. Despite not having the capacity for that larger scale, I still wanted it to have the ability to allow for some expansive fun on the board. So, you know, some modularity, I guess. And my solution for this was in the form of a trench panel. Bing bong. Look at that. Good old trench panel. You can rotate it any which way you want. And you can line it up with a identical trench panel, which I will make. But for now, here it is. Similar shape. And of course you can change the shape and direction of the trenches. So yeah, my solution was the trench panel. Now, since I've been working on these, I have come across a few other non-full board solutions to having, you know, trenches. And I'll link those wherever. Now, this isn't a how-to channel. I've mentioned it a time or two in the past, so I'm not going to get into too heavy of detail on that part. My process is generally just like I have like a mental idea. Sometimes I do a sketch. I did that in the case of the walking layer. I gather my supplies, which are almost always just hot glue and cardboard. They're cheap, accessible, and then I just make the thing. I rarely measure for making sure that like it's a good scale. I guess I sometimes like use the minis. I'll place them against the cardboard, draw a little line above the head, and be like, all right, yep, that's tall enough for the doorway. So yeah, I cut as I go. I eyeball things, or I make what I call traced measurements. So I need to, you know, have a certain section. I hold one piece of cardboard up to the section that needs to be filled in, I guess, and then I just trace along the edge, and then I cut along that tracing. And that is my traced measurement. Since I'm not building a proper house or anything, I'm just building miniature terrain. This method, it works great, and for me, it's less stressful, allowing for like a more free-flowing build process. I think this is pretty important for this type of stuff, at least for me. It keeps the mind unbound by rigid guidelines or requirements, you know, and just more free-flowing, and it's I think that's fun. Apart from the build process, I've been thinking a lot about war in general, as I gleefully create this piece of terrain that is emulating one of the most brutal and horrifying styles of combat and warfare. I can't help but wonder about the appeal of playing out war in this tabletop setting. You know, I certainly think it's better than taking up an actual weapon, but it nonetheless, I guess, sort of indulges a strange craving for seeing forces clash in combat. I don't know what it is about the ranks of squads or troops, massive tanks, cavalry charges. That's, you know, what is so appealing about that? Because in real life, like, if you imagine that it's all awful. Yeah, and it's not very fun for anyone. There are those that sadly, I think genuinely indulge and seemingly enjoy violence. For me, I guess part of the draw is, I guess thinking of the idea of goodness prevailing in combat, or in life existence. And that's really exciting, and it unveils, I guess, a lot of zeal in me. But even that idea is a fantasy and like an indoctrination to some degree. Vague binaries between good and evil presented to me since childhood, enforcing a certain idea of what is good and evil. But when you look at the scale of these conflicts, it quickly becomes foggy. That binary can fade into disillusionment. You wonder to yourself, well, like, what the fuck are we doing? I think that sense of disillusionment is magnified in our modern day as we have access to seeing all sides of the conflict, like via social media and stuff like that. Seeing how none of it has to do often with freedom or peace. It seemingly is just a bunch of like institutional like warmongering, for the sake of power and acquisition of resources. And is the only way to stop that is, to rise up, I guess, with a just violence and stop the unjust violence. I don't know. As an American, I've always been fed, American exceptionalism. The reality is, though, that our country, after the Second World War was not fucked up, just purely out of like geography. We were an ocean away from the main conflict. So after we had the upper hand and, a time to create like a sense of, I guess, like greatness and plenty. And not only that, but like this idea too that our country is some sort of like paragon of righteousness and defender slash, like enforcer of goodness. The reality is that America in, a lot of ways were just as atrocious as the Nazis, or Stalin or any other genocidal force trying to enforce its control. Our current history tells us this with the conflicts we've engaged with over the past 30 years, like over in the Middle East, and ultimately our foundation. If you look at that, like, and what allowed our country to be what it is, it's based on slavery, oppression, and genocide. There's a distance, however, both geographically and in terms of time, to these conflicts that have allowed the facade to be upheld. It's hard to know what to think or say, especially in the modern age when everything seemingly could easily be plentiful for all, and the strife could be reduced to nothing. But our current system requires constant growth, and constant growth requires constant acquisition, and constant acquisition requires, inevitably, oppression, displacement, or extermination of someone or something. It makes me think of the System of a Down song, BYOB, and the lyric, "Why don't the presidents fight the war? Why do they always send the poor? Why do they always send the poor?" But hey, I don't have the answer to these problems, as simple as it seems in my mind. To have plenty for all, I know that there are a laundry list of nuances preventing that in one form or another. For my part, I engage in this hobby not only because it's fun, but in some ways, I see it as a protest to constant and excessive consumption. While we can stockpile our piles of gray, I think, in a lot of ways, this hobby can be anti-consumptive in that there's a time-consumptive quality to it, and we have to invest to get it done and get it through. And then even after that, there's yet another time requirement in playing it. I also think it's a protest against division and against stepping in line for the sake of some arbitrary way of living that's not living. Growing up, I would have been told something like this is like a waste of time, because I was raised with the very bootstraps mentality of constantly working, and then you die, and then you go to heaven, and all is well. Is work hard for life? Of course it is. Is being a wage slave and working excessively for the sake of just getting by the answer? I don't think so, but that's just like my opinion, man. But hey, what do you think? What are your answers? What are your solutions to all of our world's problems? Let's all just play war games. It's easier, it's nicer, it's funner. But yeah, I hope you're digging on the trench terrain that I'm making. I hope it has inspired you in some ways, and maybe what I rambled on about just now made you think, or something. It makes me feel all kinds of things. But I'm having a good time over here, having some nice, good fun, making terrain. I got community, and making stuff, and that is good. Yeah, I think that's it for now. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you got something to say, you should shoot it down in the comments. And if you're not, you should totally subscribe, and we can talk about things like this more. I don't always talk about super heavy things, but I am the existential hobbyist after all. Gotta get in there sometimes. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe. I love ya. Peace. Today is December 9, 2024. Here are 7 dice. Today's numbers are on the D20, 3. On the D12, 12. On the D10, 7. On the percentage die, 30. On the D8, 8. On the D6, 5. And on the D4, 3. Those are today's numbers. Ow, my toe. D20 right on the toe. Ouchies. Excuse me. Oh yeah. Trench panel. Panel of blackness. Why, Tyler, let's get some lighting in here.